Other astronauts had to go on a spacewalk to capture it. Also on board, David Brown, 46, a Navy captain, pilot, and doctor. He joined the Navy after a medical internship, went on to fly A-6E Intruder and F-18s. He became an astronaut in '96. Columbia's mission was his first space flight. Laurel Clark, 41, a Navy diving medical officer aboard submarines, then flight surgeon who became an astronaut in '96. On board Columbia to help with science experiments, has an 8-year-old son, her home in Racine, Wisconsin. And Ilan Ramon, 48, a colonel in Israel's Air Force and the first Israeli in space. His mother and grandmother survived Auschwitz death camp. Father fought for Israel's statehood alongside his grandfather. Ramon fought in Yom Kippur War in '73 and the Lebanon War in '82. The 7 souls lost aboard Shuttle Columbia this morning. Tony Snow in Washington now with some new info for us. Tony?
Shep, there has been some question about who's going to speak when. It now appears that Sean O'Keefe, the NASA administrator, will be speaking at 1 o'clock Eastern Time from the Kennedy Space Center. Now, earlier, he had deferred making comments saying that he was going to let President Bush, have the first statement. It may mean that within the hour we will hear from the president, and then afterward from Sean O'Keefe. In addition, Bill Nelson, Democratic senator from Florida, somebody who flew on this very space shuttle, actually landed the week before the Challenger accident in 1986, is making his way to the Kennedy Space Center. He is expected to arrive between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, likely to make statements. In addition, as you can suspect or you can predict, a number of congressmen, members of Congress now are pouring out their statements. I think what we'll do, though, is wait for the President of the United States to have his say, and we will look for other developments here. In addition, as I pointed out, Shep, you got all hands on deck. You just pointed out that one of the members of this particular team was, in fact, born in India, and this particular mission was being watched closely, not merely in the United States and not merely in Israel, but also because of Kalpana Chawla in India as well. So the United States is in close contact with all the relevant governments. The State Department's at work, the National Security Council's at work, the Defense Department's at work, the Department of Homeland Security's at work, and obviously the President, he's probably, if he's not back at the White House, he'll be back soon. And based on the atmospherics we're getting right now, he may make a statement within the hour. But we're now told that there's a firm 1 o'clock Eastern Time for Sean O'Keefe to be speaking at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Shep?
All right, Tony Snow in Washington. Tony, thanks very much. As I mentioned, the debris has now been spotted at least across 3 states. Wayne Stewart is a reporter for the Palestine Herald Press. Joins us live on the phone now. Wayne, it's my understanding you've been to one of these debris fields. What can you tell me?
Yes, most of the debris is small. We have found one small, like a ceramic tile, about 4 inches thick, scorched on one side black.
And where is that?
It is in Anderson County. We're approximately 100 miles southeast of the Dallas Metroplex.
Okay.
And the other piece we saw was like about a yard-long strip of rubber, maybe a tire, fell in a gentleman's yard as he was watering his lawn at the time, fell about 30 feet from him.
I know that so many Texans got up this morning to watch this event, as they do whenever the skies are crystal clear, which, the chances of that aren't really good. It's a rarity.
Sure.
I'm guessing a lot of people were outside and saw this. Have you talked to any who did?
Yes, I have. The fixed base operator there, our municipal airport, heard the explosion, and he said it rumbled for about 30 seconds. He went outside and saw the contrails of the shuttle as it passed over, and being an experienced pilot, it was kind of instinctual as to what was happening at the time. But he said it lasted about 30 seconds, and very loud explosion.
Just re-entering at a height of more than 200,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to imagine that you could feel that over such a large area, but I've talked to person after person who speaks of this rumble.
Yes, we had one gentleman call in to the newspaper early this morning, told us that actually almost shook him out of bed. It was such a powerful thing. And so we've had, our phones have been jammed all day with reports such as that. And one person we talked with on the scene said her and her husband were asleep. She lived close to one of the area where the tire fell, and she said it actually shook them out of bed almost.
Wayne Stewart is a reporter for the Palestine Herald Press. Wayne, we're getting reports from Associated Press that the National Guard is now standing watch on some of these pieces of debris. Do you have any idea how many have been spotted in your general area?
I have talked with the local sheriff's department, and they've said there are pieces all over the county, but they're all small pieces. The largest piece we have heard of so far, which I haven't witnessed personally, but I've heard is on it's a major highway between between Palestine and Tyler, and they said it's about 8-foot long piece of metal. But most of the pieces are small, and our county is largely, or I guess I should say sparsely populated, and so there may be a lot of pieces on the ground that nobody has even spotted yet.
Wayne Stewart, stay on the line with us if you would. I want to go now to Nacogdoches, Texas, to the Nacogdoches Airport, and Ed Romer, who's an official there. Ed, it's my understanding that some of the debris has fallen at your airport.
Yes, we have a large round steel tank about 5 feet in diameter that landed on the end of one of the runways. And at the time, nobody knew what it was, and they rolled it off and cleared the runway. But it's a pretty big piece of debris, and we've got smaller pieces of debris along the entrance road to the airport. And I understand there are pieces all over the city of Nacogdoches, different sizes.
Wow, you describe it as 5 feet around. You said it's been moved. What kind of tank are we talking about? Any clue?
It's a steel tank. It looks like, I don't think it has anything to do with the fuel system, but it's a large steel tank with hoses and tubes on it, and it's got shrapnel holes in it, and it's about 5 or 6 feet in diameter. It's pretty big.
How was it moved away? Someone just went out and rolled it off the airport
runway? Well, they put it in a pickup truck to get it off the runway. They didn't know what it was. We had to clear the runways. We got a lot of military aircraft coming in from Houston to assess the situation. We had to get the runways clear. But at the time, they hadn't even heard about the explosion.
Have you heard reports from areas around Nacogdoches as well?
I understand there are pieces of debris. I had a call from someone before I even knew about it saying that they found a piece in the yard. He had heard an explosion. We thought it might have come off one of the airplanes in this area. And then, of course, it turns out it was a piece of the shuttle.
Ed, I'm reading on Associated Press with a Dateline out of Nacogdoches, bits of machinery and other metal debris were found strewn all across the city this morning, hours after the shuttle broke apart. Quoting now a man named James Milford, who's owner of Milford Barbershop downtown, quote, "It's all over Nacogdoches."
They have activated the Emergency Operations Center, and some major efforts are on to notify people not to do anything to talk to him.
Ed Romer, we're losing the cell phone connection, but we thank you. Let's go back to Wayne Stewart now, who's a reporter from the Palestine Herald Press. Wayne, there have been no reports of people, looking for souvenirs out of all this yet.
No, I haven't heard anything about that.
One thing that authorities are saying is how important it is to stay away from it and call the police if you see it, because of the chemicals that are involved and all the rest. Not only can it be dangerous, but it's also a piece of evidence here as they try to reconstruct this.
Yeah, there was one incident where there was it looked like another ceramic tile in a open field, and there were emergency personnel there keeping us from getting to it because they were told to keep everybody away from it at that time.
Sure, I guess it's entirely possible that there are many, many pieces that have not yet been found, and authorities, they cannot stress anymore. If you do find them, just stay away from them and call someone. Wayne Stewart, a reporter for the Palestine Herald Press. Wayne, thank you very much. Governor Huckabee of Arkansas is also saying that debris has been found in 3 counties there. You consider how fast this thing was going, how quickly it broke up, and at such an altitude, I guess it's not all that surprising to learn that it is spread all over the place. And as awful as all of this sounds, it would sound as if this cataclysmic event did not allow for suffering for any of the 7 people who were on board. Let's go to the United States Capitol now. A live picture over the U.S. Capitol where the flag has been lowered to half-staff. It's so difficult to watch this. John Pike is back with us again. There will be a roller coaster of emotions in this nation today, and the president will no doubt come up and try to settle us down just as he did after the last national tragedy we had, but then very quickly they have to get to work. John Pike?
For the White House to decide what sort of investigation there's going to be, whether they're going to have the independent investigation that we had after the Challenger accident, in addition to the investigation that NASA is going to be conducting. And obviously, at any time of major national crisis, the Congress has a role to play. I think that the appropriate committees are going to have to decide when they are going to start having some initial hearings, whether they're going to have a separate investigation of their own, because there are obviously some very, very difficult questions that are going to have to be answered in the weeks ahead, relating not simply to the what happened in this particular case, but to the future of the shuttle program, to the future of the space station, to the future of NASA as an enterprise. Because the big challenge that I think that Sean O'Keefe has had coming into office as NASA administrator is that NASA has been under tremendous budgetary pressure because of some unexpected cost overruns on the space station. That program has been restructured, and obviously the White House has had more important things to worry about than what's going on over at NASA with the war on terrorism, the impending war with Iraq. NASA simply has not had the high-level visibility with the public or with the White House that it had in times past. And I think that the White House is going to have to focus on the future of the space program in a way that it has had the luxury of not doing thus far.
Was the lack of focus something that those who cover NASA closely and study NASA closely, was it something of which they were aware and about which they were concerned?
Well, I think that there was certainly an appreciation of the difficulty that the new administrator was going to have compared to previous administrators. I mean, during the Cold War, the NASA administrator had a difficult technical job, but the political job was relatively easy. There was a Cold War on, there was an arms race, there was a space race. All they had to do was point to what the Soviets were doing, and it was fairly easy to explain what the space program was about. To Dan Goldin's credit, he was able to transform NASA, give it new post-Cold War missions. But at the very end of his tenure, all of a sudden it was discovered that there was a massive cost overrun in the International Space Station project. The new administrator knew that he was going to have a thankless task of allocating the pain to figure out how to deal with that cost overrun. The Bush administration had great difficulty finding someone to take on that thankless task, and finally got Sean O'Keefe to step up to it. And now I think he's faced with a vastly more difficult challenge than even he had anticipated in leading NASA. This is clearly going to be a defining moment for NASA as an agency, and I think a defining moment for America as a country, because as has previously been said this morning, America is a spacefaring people. It's a great deal about our national identity. It continues to be the case that even if people don't watch every shuttle launch, when they come here to Washington, they head straight to the Air and Space Museum, because when they go in there, they know that they're standing basically at the center of the American dream, and space has been an important part of the American dream from the very beginning. The question now, I think, is how we translate that dream into a reality of a program that's adequately funded and has a clear direction and a clear sense of purpose. A very big set of challenges that we're going to face in the coming weeks and months.
Enormous. John Pike, thank you. I want to go to my colleague Kieran Chetry down in Studio N with an update on the morning. Kieran?
Shepard, and right now it is almost exactly 3 hours to the exact second that the shuttle Columbia was supposed to land. We know now that didn't happen, but the first official word saying the space shuttle is gone, coming from a senior official who wanted to remain anonymous just a few moments ago. Meantime, people living in the city of Nashville Nacogdoches, right there in East Texas, about 100 or so miles north of Dallas, are finding this, of Houston rather, are finding debris from the shuttle scattered everywhere. In fact, I talked to somebody that lived nearby who called Fox News before we knew anything about the shuttle, saying they just heard this enormous roar overhead. It shook their house for a very long period of time, several minutes, and then they ran outside to see what was going on. But now they are finding pieces of debris that a senior official is saying indeed belong to the shuttle Columbia. In fact, one man, a dentist, said that it crashed right through his office. He has about a 3-foot-long chunk just smashed right through his door. But the one important thing before I go is that NASA is stressing for anybody not to touch any of this debris. One, it could be toxic, and two, of course, they're going to need it as they continue their investigation into how this tragedy happened. Shepard, back to you.
All right. Our apologies for Kieran Chetry's mic problems. We'll get those worked out. In the meantime, you're looking live at the chopper from our Fox station in Dallas, KDFW, Fox 4 News there, where immediately after these reports, they put the helicopter up, and it's clear, you know, what they're seeing here. The authorities have roped off an area with crime tape, and that's believed to be at least a piece of what was Space Shuttle Columbia. You know, we mentioned an hour ago that these pictures would dominate much of the day, and that is certainly proving to be the case. Many small pieces reported across Natchitoches, Texas. My apologies for mispronouncing that earlier, but we now know across 3 states. Let's listen.
I would anticipate they're going to be finding a lot of this debris right now, and then for the next several years, maybe decades, that they will be finding individual pieces when a farmer plows a field or something like that, or a hunter goes out into the woods and stumbles across a tile or some of the smaller pieces and things like that. Because you think 40 miles and it was going, I believe, 12,000 miles an hour when it was over North Texas, then that could be a very large debris field.
That's the chopper reporter from KDFW in Dallas.
Monitor things here. We understand that there's a lot of debris near Nacogdoches, and we have not been there. But if we go there, we won't be able to do live shots for our viewers back in North Texas. So we're going to try to see if we can find any more in this area. We'll have to refuel, and then we'll be back, go from there.
So there you have it. These pictures will become very familiar, and you wonder how helpful any of this can be. The chopper pilot making a statement that certainly rings true across the vast lands of Texas, a sparsely populated area. Much of this about which we're speaking, there could be pieces, as he mentioned, for decades and decades to come. So there you have it. That's the reality. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson is on the line with us. And Senator, as though I've been watching this for a number of hours as you have, it's truly impossible to believe.
It is. It's just gripping. I was out walking this morning in my neighborhood in Dallas, and I heard what seemed like a sonic boom. I've heard them before because we have F-16 trainers in the Fort Worth, Dallas area. And then when I got home and turned on the television, I realized what I had heard, and of course have been glued to the television ever since.
A number of residents of your state, longtime residents, the commander of this flight, the pilot of this flight, the commander from Amarillo, the pilot from Lubbock. Just a horrible national and international tragedy, but certainly hits home as some of those lost from Texas, and then so much of the remains are over Texas.
Well, of course, in Texas we feel such a pride in NASA because that's where our astronauts live and train and work, and we have always reveled in the great feats that our NASA astronauts have given us, and I do think there is a very important mission for NASA for the future, and the bio research and the biotech that we're going to be able to do. And of course this just sets us back, and we just have to realize how brave these men and women are who really are test pilots, and they are pushing the envelope of research and technology for our country.
There will be a great deal of activity on Capitol Hill, certainly, no doubt, regarding this incident. What is the role, in your mind, of the body on which you serve in the months to come?
We will definitely have oversight hearings. This is my committee. Our Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee will be holding hearings, and of course I have questioned Sean O'Keefe about the cuts in the NASA budget, and was it going to compromise safety, and I think it's way premature to analyze this, but it's a legitimate area of inquiry. Are we cutting the budget so much that we are compromising what we must do in the safety area? And I think that the mission of NASA is so important. America should never walk away from being the leader in space and science research and technology, but we do have to fund it at a level that we assure that we have total safety. And I think we have done that in the past, but we've seen a large number of budget cuts, and we will have to determine if we are cutting too much.
Had that been a question you asked before, and if so, were you confident with the answer you received?
It is a question that I've asked before. Senator Nelson of Florida and I have been the ones on the Commerce Committee that have been most intent in talking about the cuts and did they compromise safety. And I think the response we got was always safety first, from Dan Golden and then later Sean O'Keefe, that safety would always be the first mission to make sure that the young men and women who are up there on this very important responsibility for our country would also have every protection. And I know that we've never had a landing mishap before. Always in the past, it has been on takeoff. So this will be a new area of inquiry, and certainly I know that our people at NASA, I've talked to the Deputy Administrator today, and they are all just, of course, anxious to find out what went wrong, because it looked like a perfect mission. They were coming into their landing. There was no indication of any malfunction, and then all of a sudden they watched in horror as the boom and then all the scattering of debris. So it's I've offered them to use my office in Dallas if they need something very quickly to start the process, but they will be sending people all over East Texas looking for this debris to try to see if they can find something that shows them what might have gone wrong here, where the blow-up was, and where it looks like they might be able to see the impact damage.
Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, Republican of Texas. Senator, thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
All right. We're getting new information from the White House now about the chain of events as they may happen today. Our correspondent James Rosen is there. James, what do you know?
Shepard, President Bush's motorcade is now just minutes away from the White House. According to a report we just received from the pool that is traveling with the president's motorcade, it is near the State Department in the Foggy Bottom area of Washington. That is just minutes away from the White House. The president was informed of this event shortly after it occurred by his chief of staff, Andrew Card, the same man who had the distinct displeasure of informing the president about 9/11 when that occurred. The president spoke at around 10:38 a.m. Eastern Time with Sean O'Keefe, the director of NASA, a senior administration official here at the White House, and also a CIA official. Both tell Fox News that there is no belief that this incident is related to terrorism in any way. Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge is here at the White House. He has been in touch with state officials in 5 southern and southwestern states, including Texas, Louisiana, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, about the handling of debris that has been raining down on those states and other related matters. The National Security Advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, is also here at the White House, and the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, is at the Pentagon. The president, when he gets here in just a few minutes to the White House, is expected to confer with officials and also place a condolence call to the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Of course, this flight had on it the first Israeli astronaut, Colonel Ilan Ramon. We are expecting the president, as I said, just any moment now. When he does speak with the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, no doubt he will hear from the Israeli Prime Minister what we have already heard by way of a statement released by the Israeli government through the office of Prime Minister Sharon. I can read that statement to you now. It's very brief. It says, "The state of Israel and its citizens stand at this difficult hour alongside the families of the astronauts, the family of Ilan Ramon, and the American people and government." That from Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. We expect that President Bush will also be making some kind of statement to the American people today, insofar as we have seen the movement of the presidential podium from the Eisenhower Executive Office building across the compound to the West Wing area of the White House. However, important to note here, as this is very much on the minds of a lot of people at this particular time, the White House official stressing that this is not believed to be terrorism related. Shepard, back to you.
The White House, James, thanks very much. As the president makes his way there, of course, we'll take you back. In the meantime, the next event that is scheduled, at least, is a Kennedy Space Center news conference at Cape Canaveral in Florida, scheduled for 1 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time. And we will get the first preliminary official information from NASA at that time, as Sean O'Keefe is scheduled to speak, the NASA administrator, at 1 o'clock Eastern. And now for an update on the morning's events, let's go to Kieran Chetry in our newsroom.
Hi there, Shepard. Yeah, we are going to bring you up to date, of course, as you just said, and a reminder, which we are all standing by for now, a press conference scheduled from NASA for 1 p.m. And, of course, Fox News will carry that live for you. We're just looking at video right now of the space shuttle and the debris there happening. I got off the phone just a few minutes ago, actually, with somebody from the area who was telling me that they were able to hear this explosion, and it pulled them out of their houses. They live near an area gas station, and they thought that had actually exploded. This is in eastern Texas, about 135 miles northeast of Houston, where right now they are finding debris from the shuttle scattered everywhere in this area. There's also been reports that the debris from the shuttle was found in areas in Arkansas, some of the southern counties in Arkansas, as well as New Mexico. Members of the National Guard are now out. They've been dispatched to those types of places, including Nacogdoches, as we talked about, to protect the debris. And NASA being very careful to tell people to make sure, if you come in contact with the debris, if you see it, if it's hit anywhere around you, not to touch it. Of course, for two reasons. One, it can be toxic. The other reason is because they need it as they go on and try to figure out exactly what happened, this tragedy that happened to the Space Shuttle Columbia. There are word that people finding debris as far away in counties as south in Arkansas as Howard and Columbia counties. Again, NASA is set to give us a press conference, a news conference on this tragedy at 1 p.m. We will, of course, carry it live for you. Another really unbelievable, huge chunks of this debris actually blocking off entrance roads to the airport in Nacogdoches. Somebody that was speaking there who's on hand, some of the rescue and crews, saying that there's one large, huge chunk, several feet in diameter, looking almost like a tank, was right in the middle of the runway. They say there's also pieces of debris along the roadway, several feet in diameter. And there's one of the dentists, a local dentist here in the town of Nacogdoches, saying that a piece of debris from the shuttle smashed right through his office and onto the floor. He's, of course, leaving it alone as NASA is instructing others. President Bush was informed of this situation as he was heading to a presidential retreat at Camp David for the weekend. Immediately upon finding out about this, turned around because of weather situations in the area. He's traveling by motorcade to get back to the White House, which he either has arrived now or should any moment, to address the nation as well to talk about this tragedy. Senior U.S. officials about 3 hours after the tragedy saying the space shuttle is gone and those 7 brave people on board are lost. We saw this video early here on Fox and Friends. About 9:15, 9:30, we started seeing some of these pictures and realized just from looking at it that something didn't look right. But 3 hours later is the only time we were able to actually get word. NASA not really talking about what happened, but still telling people to look out for a debris field, just not saying exactly why. So again, there's the pictures that you're looking at of the shuttle Columbia. And a lot of the experts we talked to saying something just didn't look right. They knew it as they saw those other pieces streaking down to Earth, as well as that large chunk of debris. Shepard, I will keep you abreast of the latest information coming up in a few minutes. I send it back to you now.
Good, Kieran. We'll check back. Thanks very much, Kieran Chetry in the newsroom. Let's bring on the line now Bill Anders, astronaut himself, Apollo 11, flew around the moon. Sir, a very tough day for us all, especially within your very close community.
Yeah, Shepard, it's a very sad day. I was on Apollo 8, by the way, and I don't know much more except what I've heard from the exceptionally good coverage of Fox News, but there are 2 points I'd like to make. One of them is that during this phase of reentry, the spacecraft vehicle is probably under the most stress it has during the whole mission. It gets a vertical stress during launch, but it's during reentry where the wings and the subsurface and tiles and tail surfaces are really stressed at extremely high heat. So any problem there, that's when you'd have a potential for a breakup. The other point is that I personally know Administrator O'Keefe. I know he's an exceptionally dedicated and good administrator, and I'm sure that he and his NASA team are going to work real hard to get to the bottom of the problem.
He's one who has always been very careful to say, we must have the proper amount of funding. I know you followed this closely. Was it your sense that they did?
Well, I think NASA has to realize that the space race a la Apollo is over, and they can't expect the kind of money we had to beat the Russians to the moon. But that they've been, we have to just shepherd the dollars they do have. And Sean O'Keefe, with his management and financial background, as well as his enthusiasm for space, I think is the right guy to do that. And I'm sure that he and the whole Houston and Kennedy team and the contractor teams will come up with pretty good answers on just what did happen.
Bill Anders, Apollo 8 astronaut. Forgive the misspeak, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's get an update from Washington now. The president should have arrived at the White House by now. Tony, has he?
We don't know yet, Shep. It's interesting. What they're doing is it's a closed press event. In other words, reporters are not going to be able to see the presidential limo pulling in. It may seem odd that nobody be able to see it, but we're expecting if the president isn't on the scene, he'll be there quite soon. We don't know either when he's going to make a statement. We've been told that Sean O'Keefe, the NASA administrator, will be speaking to the press at the top of the hour from the Kennedy Space Center, where we hope we can get more details. It's sort of a minor miracle, Shep, that so far we have no reports of injuries. The space shuttle, at least when fully loaded, weighs 4.5 million tons. So this is, 4.5 million pounds. This is an extraordinarily heavy craft, and obviously big pieces can break off. The other thing, as you pointed out, this craft was 39 miles in the sky when people heard a boom so loud they thought something had happened just outside their own homes. It was described in one Wire report as if a car had slammed into a building, the building people were occupying. So what we had here is a catastrophic event. There you're looking at some photos that were taken by our Dallas affiliate, KDFW, and it's an extraordinary thing. Look how charred that particular piece of metal is, and it's pockmarked. Obviously an explosion that just ripped through the Space Shuttle Columbia as it was trying to make its way back to the Kennedy Space Center. Now, NASA lost contact with the space shuttle 16 minutes before scheduled landing at 9:16 a.m. today, Eastern Time, and merely 5 minutes before the family members of the crew had been ushered into a VIP area. Clearly, nobody had expected anything of this sort. There were no reports of trouble. Also, radar indicates that the debris field may extend all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. We don't have any reports there, but at least the early radar reports, according to Wire sources, are saying that they went to Shreveport, Louisiana, and possibly into the Gulf. So it appears that the explosion may have begun somewhere over New Mexico, where people are now looking for some items, all the way through Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, making its way all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, we have just confirmed that President Bush has arrived at the White House, and there's going to be some sort of comment shortly, according to our James Rosen, we think, but we are not entirely sure. And we also think we may be able to provide some video very soon of the presidential limos coming in and all that sort of thing. But at any event, President Bush now back in the White House. He is surrounded by top staff. Vice President Dick Cheney was hunting this week in Texas this weekend. He is not back yet, but the president, Condoleezza Rice, other senior officials gathered at the White House. Tom Ridge, the Homeland Security Director, has been there all day. It is worth repeating something we've said many times. It has now been confirmed by numerous administration sources, including from the CIA. Nobody expects, nobody believes that terrorism had anything to do with this. This was some sort of catastrophic failure. Also speaking earlier today with an administration official, I was getting sort of a sense of what the shuttle construction is like. If you get a couple of tiles coming off, it is it is possible for the heat to build up at this point of reentry, and this was halfway through the reentry at a point of maximum stress and maximum heat, where heat actually could effectively dissolve the skin of the space shuttle. And once that happens, the zipper effect, as they call it, takes over. The whole thing is just sliced open like it can, and you get the kind of tragic result we have seen today. Now, there is some concern among NASA officials that even though they are going to have enormous amounts of data leading up to the event, they did not have telemetry at the moment that they lost contact with the space shuttle. That is, at the moment it went off the radar. And there is some fear, some concern, as we've seen with this large chunk, that the key items may in fact have been incinerated on their way to Earth. So once again, the Space Shuttle Columbia today, the oldest in the fleet, on its 28th mission, 113th shuttle mission overall, vanished from radar and vanished from contact with NASA 16 minutes before its scheduled landing at 9:16 a.m. Eastern Time. It carried not merely an Israeli citizen, an Israeli pilot, but also Kalpana Chawla, who is an American citizen who was born in India. This flight was watched closely both in India and in Israel. President Bush is expected to speak very soon with Prime Minister Ariel Sharon of Israel. Israelis have been hanging on every detail of this flight. One other sort of heart-rending note. We live in a high-tech age, and on the website, I'm sorry, go ahead,
Excuse me for interrupting, Tony, because I don't know if you're getting this feed in Washington, but I know the presidential motorcade, the tape playback of that is coming in on our channel 69 here in-house, which I believe is REM 19, and I know those are pictures that we wanted to show.
Exactly right there.
And there they are.
Oh. This is the president. Actually, this is part of the president making his way. It looks like the George Washington Parkway in the Washington area, making its way toward the 14th Street Bridge and on toward the White House. So once again, we are seeing photos from earlier. I am also told, Shep, that in this tape that we've got, the motorcade tape, we will not actually be seeing the president, but we will see the entourage making its way toward the White House. As I was saying, this was an international mission that was closely watched in Israel, also in India, and it obviously is something that people around the world are going to be mourning, and NASA has a considerable job ahead of it. As you had heard, Sean O'Keefe, like previous NASA administrators, really every NASA administrator since the end of the moon landing program, has had to deal with significant budget cuts. And the question is whether the United States is going to continue to have a vigorous manned space program. We also have the one complicating factor that there are 2 Americans and 1 Russian aboard the International Space Station. If they climb aboard a Soyuz craft that is attached to it, that means that the space station itself, already the subject of numerous cost overruns, will have nobody in it. So there are going to have to be some hard decisions, and maybe we'll hear some from Sean O'Keefe at the top of the hour, about 20 minutes from now. He will be speaking to reporters from the Kennedy Space Center. Shep?
You know, Tony, the first time I heard that about the fact that there are astronauts up there, I mean, you know there are in advance, but you don't think about it until here we have this. Now we have a shuttle program, which will certainly be on hold, and we're going to have to turn to the Russians, I guess, for help here.
Well, and another interesting thing, you heard from Bill Anders that maybe Bill Anders was on Apollo 8, which was the first spacecraft actually to go around the moon. Frank Borman was the commander of that mission. They went around about Christmas time in 1968 and took the first memorable shots as they came over the moon, looking at half of the planet Earth, the other half shadowed by the moon itself. But Bill Anders was saying, well, there's not competition. Well, there may be a space race, Shep. And the last week, the Chinese have announced that they plan to go ahead and put together manned spacecraft of their own. So it may be that for reasons of national pride or whatever, there may be some political impetus, but it's too early to tell. Obviously, people who are partisans and fans of the space program are going to want a lot more money. Meanwhile, the debate in recent years has shifted to social spending, and that's where the cash has gone. Shep?
Tony, we're good enough to be joined now, the two of us good enough to be joined by Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, also a member of this very small family. Senator Nelson, good morning. Good afternoon. Your thoughts?
Afternoon. It's a national tragedy, and we went through this almost exactly 17 years ago and 3 days on the 28th of January 1986 when Challenger exploded.
Of course, on Columbia's 24th flight back in 1986, Senator Nelson was. And Senator, I was just talking to Kay Bailey Hutchinson of Texas. The two of you have spoken openly and often about funding for this agency. It's very early to be speculating, but is it your sense, as you've stated so many times, that you believe that the funding needs to be looked at much more closely?
Well, indeed. And what I have been advocating is that NASA do the safety upgrades on the space shuttle. We don't have any reason to think that today's tragedy had any connection with the delay on those safety upgrades. But, you know, safety has got to be the number one concern. At the same time, we've got to realize that space flight is risky business, and the ascent and the reentry phase of the space flight is the most dangerous. And so it's far too early to know what happened, but something happened. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's not the computer, which has got to have the angle of attack coming back into the Earth's atmosphere at exactly the right angle. Otherwise, the spacecraft will burn up.
Senator Bill Nelson, I know you have to get into the news conference. One will be joining in just a moment, a man who flew in 1986 on Columbia's 24th flight. Senator, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I want to get to the line now to John Getter, TV news correspondent, worked for CBS News out of our D.C. bureau now, covered the crash of the Challenger explosion. John, good of you to join us. There's so much to be done now, and I guess we can look to history for a few guidelines.
Shepard, there is. If I could, I'd like to address a couple of quick things that you were just talking about with
Please.
Tony and with the Senator. First of all, for the guys who are still aboard the International Space Station, they have a Soyuz capsule there that is their lifeboat to come home. In the case of any emergency, they're not marooned. That's good news. Secondly, the Soyuz capsules still fly routinely back and forth to the space station. So if it comes necessary to get more people up there or something, they do have that capability. Undoubtedly, if we look back to what happened with the Challenger, the space shuttles will not be flying for a while. In the case of the Challenger, it was well over a year before the next shuttle mission, the 26th shuttle flight, got into space.
Is it your sense that there might be more urgency this time or less so? Is it your sense that this could be the sort of thing that could jeopardize this program?
I would like to think, Shepard, that we have decided as a country that we're going to space, that we're going to explore space. Tony was talking about how this mission touched people all around the world, and that's something that is so universal about exploration itself. And in our time and our age, we explore space. That's what is there. And it brings everybody together, and it touches everybody. It appeals to the best part of that which is being a human being, trying to find out what's there, why, and what it all means. And so I personally can't see any way that we would ever end our space exploration. What we're clearly going to have to do, though, is address what went wrong and how do we fix it. Senator Nelson was talking about the angle of attack there. For those of you not quite familiar with it, what that means is if the Earth is down here, the shuttle's flying in this way, nose up in the air, so that its heat shields are functional. If it gets a little sideways, a little cattywampus there, it's in serious trouble. And in fact, on the loss of the Challenger, people described that as an explosion. In fact, what happened was that because of problems with the rocket, when it was climbing up, it turned sideways, and the aerodynamic forces, the force of just the wind itself, literally stripped the Challenger into pieces. And it disintegrated. The explosion, the fire we saw was the fuel erupting. In this case today, we don't know what happened, of course, but my guess would be that something happened that caused it to get a little out of alignment, and that something very similar happened. I say that because of the fact that on the pictures that we've seen of the Columbia coming down in pieces today, they are eerily reminiscent, as others have remarked, of those that we saw on the day that we lost the Challenger in Florida.
So much so, but yet another perfect sky that day. It's just, it really is eerie to see this, especially given that all of the testing that was done for those 2 long years, all of the improvements that they believed were necessary, thought that they had this thing back up and running, and certainly not flawless, there's no such thing, but it was widely believed that they had done all that could be done and that the shuttle was a safe way to go.
Well, as one who's privileged to known a bunch of astronauts and still know several, I can tell you, as one guy said who went on the first flight after the Challenger, he said, you know, if you knew that this thing was likely to have a failure and you still flew it, you'd be crazy, and I ain't crazy. is how he put it. And they've done everything that they can in these cases. You're absolutely right. Let's touch on something, too. You mentioned that they did a lot of work there in the 1.5, 2 years, whatever the period was after Challenger. One of the things they did was they came up with an escape system, a system where they could, in an emergency, bail out. The basic scenario is that the captain the commander brings it to a straight and level flight, and they pop the hatch open, and they can bail out and survive. In this case, from all that we've heard, the crew said nothing. They didn't indicate that they knew there was any problem, that one moment it was there, the next moment it was not. So I would suspect that whatever happened was wholly catastrophic, and that the crew had no time to react, probably didn't know what happened until after it happened, if at all.
John Getter, who covered the explosion of Challenger. John, thank you very much. You mentioned that escape route, part of the parachute, which was part of that project, was developed by a man named James Bajan, who's on the line with us now. Sir, good of you to join us.
Hi.
Tell us about the procedure, how it was put together, and how it worked.
Well, subsequent to the Challenger accident in 1986, as we understood what had transpired there, it was clear that that if we had an ability for the crew to be able to bail out, that the Challenger could have been a survivable accident had that been on board. So we developed the system such that under certain conditions, and it depended on the crew module still being stable as it was after breakup on Challenger, as you heard Mr. Getter describe, that it would have been possible for the crew to then jettison the side hatch if we made it so it could be jettisonable, which it was. That was done, and with parachutes to bail out. And we've tested that numerous times on various aircraft regular aircraft with actual live jumpers to test that this system could work, and it's been on board ever since the flight that Rick Halleck, I think he had on a little bit earlier, flew the first mission with that, and then I flew the third mission after that with it on board. It's been on ever since. If the crew module remains stable and the G loading, the accelerations they saw were appropriate, it would be possible to get out. Apparently, at what transpired today, that wasn't the case. Otherwise, there would have been the ability to do that. I must say that the escape system was not designed to assure escape capability under all situations. That's just not possible to do in any credible way. So NASA looked at the most likely scenarios that needed to be protected against, and looking at that versus constraints of weight and performance, and came up with the one we did. And it's a good system, but you can't cover every risk, and everyone knows there's risk involved with flying, and willingly takes that on.
James Bajan on the line with us, who was an astronaut who flew on Columbia. And James, before John Glenn's second flight, I spoke to him at KSC and asked him about this very thing, and he said, you do not think about the risks. It's not where your mind goes. You're trained to do otherwise. Was it in the back of your mind?
No, I think what John said is exactly right. I think with most folks, when you go out there, you know there's a risk before you go out. Everybody makes sure their will is up to date and all that before you fly. It's part of our pre-flight planning, quite frankly. But once you go out there that day, the best way to be sure you're going to come back in one piece is concentrate on the job at hand. It does you no good to worry about what might happen as far as, might I be killed? What you want to be thinking about is, what do I do to make sure we get the job done right? And it's just, you need to concentrate on what you can do something about and do that well, and I'm sure that's what the crew was doing today.
Yeah, I'm confident. It sounds as if, some of the best news of the day, it seems to me, is it sounds as if, from every description we've got, that these people who were on board probably had no idea of anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we're just going to have to wait and see what the investigation says to understand that.
Sure. James Bajan, it's good of you to join us. Thank you very much. The most recent information that we got was certainly that there was no call from the crew, no sign of anything unusual. 1 minute it was there, and the next minute it was gone. We're expecting a news conference from Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral in Florida, the proud home of the shuttle for many years now, the Space Coast, Brevard County, Broward County, the whole Brevard and Volusia County, very proud of their involvement and the thousands upon thousands who work at that facility, and certainly a very tight-knit community which rallies around the space program. Certainly a pall over that entire section of Florida today, and we're expecting the NASA administrator to be the first speaker today. I want to go down to, I know we have a guest on the line, but the honest truth is I just don't know who it is. Ambassador Ginsburg? Ambassador Mark Ginsburg with us from Washington. Ambassador, Good of you to join us. Your thoughts?
Well, Shep, I had been talking to Israel this morning. Clearly, this was an enormous occasion for Israelis to know that one of their pride and joy, a 48-year-old Air Force Colonel, Ilan Ramon, who was the son of an Auschwitz death camp survivor. By the way, one of Israel's greatest Air Force pilots who took part in the 1981 attack by Israel against an Iraqi nuclear reactor, fought in the Yom Kippur War of 1973 and in Lebanon. This was one of Israel's great moments of partnership with the United States, Shep. And there's clearly, on top of everything else taking place in Israel, an enormous sense of tragedy, great loss, great kinship with America and with Americans, but enormous sorrow over what just happened, particularly because he leaves such a wonderful family behind, 4 children, a wife, and his father and mother, and his brother-in-law and sister-in-law.
Yeah, another on board today, Kalpana Chawla, who a Columbia crew member who perished today, was the first Indian-born woman in space. Front pages of Indian newspapers today carried her picture to celebrate her return. Such a routine event here in the United States. And yet our friends in India and our friends in Israel experiencing this for the first time, and enormous news, 2 enormous heroes, and such an extraordinary loss.
It shows, Shep, the enormous importance that so many countries have attached to participating with the American people in space exploration. Over the last few years, our space program has become really internationalized. It's been a unifier of countries and allies around the world. So many countries have joined forces with the United States at a time on the ground on Earth where there seems to be such dissension and disconcertedness over the conduct of international affairs around the world. It seems that space has been a great unifier of people and countries. We've had Arabs who have gone into space with the United States. We've now had an Israeli. It seems that America has been able to show the world what an enormous impact space has had in bringing people together.
Yeah, it certainly has. It's always been billed as and held up as a unifier. Kay Bailey Hutchinson talking about that today. She and Bill Nelson both talking about the importance of this program and how it must go forward. Certainly, each of those senators has a special tie to this program. There will be questions, no doubt, Ambassador, from many different areas. Your thoughts on how maybe we should all try to process this?
Well, one of the most interesting things that came about in my career as ambassador to Morocco is that it turns out that Morocco, of all countries, was the emergency landing site for anything that may have gone wrong at Cape Canaveral. And I used to shuttle down to an Air Force base with Americans from NASA to, in effect, hold a contingency watch in the event anything happened either on a landing or on a takeoff. My hope and expectation, obviously, is that the United States continues to invest in space. This is a terrible tragedy for all of us and for those countries that have lost citizens on board. But, you know, we're resilient people, Shep, and I'm sure that the President will lead this country in sorrow and in mourning, but we will pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and we will continue the most important 21st century challenge that we face, which is space exploration. I'm sure that Israeli astronaut Ramon and Colonel Husband and the other American astronauts would not have wanted their tragedy to stop space exploration at all.
No doubt about it. Ambassador Ginsburg, it's good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shep.
All right. I want to go to Bob Moulter now, who's in Texas and an eyewitness to some of this. Bob, what did you see?
Shep, it was a little after 8 this morning, approximately 8:09, and I was sitting there having coffee, and all of a sudden the house started to shake violently. There was a very loud, like an explosion, except that it was continuous. And we live very close to a railroad track, and I thought, well, God, you know, there's been an explosion over there with the train. When I walked outside, there was no smoke, but when I looked up overhead, there was a huge plume of smoke, which I've now come to find out was the actual vapor trail, and it was zigzagging, and the sound was continuing, and the ground was shaking. I watched it for a good minute and a half as it disappeared to the southeast, and I lost track of it in the sun. But if you've seen the coverage that's been shown on television, that vapor trail, magnify it 10 or 15 times. That's how wide it was, and it was not in a straight line.
It is very difficult to understand from our vantage point, not being where you are, hearing it and seeing it, how a noise 39 miles up in the sky could rock such an enormous area.
I agree. The only thing that I can put it close to is, and I've said this to many people, if you've heard the sound of a tornado coming, or if you stand next, and I mean very close to the railroad tracks as a speeding freight train went by, that's what it sounds like.
Mm. Wow, Bob Moult, you're in the town of Palestine, it's my understanding, and
Yes,
I've
sir.
been told by a reporter for the newspaper there, the Herald Press, that in fact there is a great deal of debris in your town. Have you seen any of that?
No, I have not. The local media stations here have been reporting that there's been debris found in Lufkin and Nacogdoches area, which is about 40 miles to the east-southeast of us.
Sure.
I was not aware that any debris had yet landed here or was on the ground here in Palestine.
All right, well, it could just be the reporter who'd made his way over to the next place. Good of you to join us. Bob Moulter coming to us from Palestine, Texas. Want to tell you about sort of how this day has progressed. You might imagine that on a Saturday morning, you're not sitting around studying about the astronauts who are on board this shuttle. And it's, given all that we've seen as a nation, it's hard to imagine that these people went up there, and I dare say 99% of those people watching now didn't know the name of one person, you know, within this country. I'm one of those. And a little while ago was handed a list of the names of the 7 people. And it was a little bio that was put out from Associated Press, and it talked about one of the astronauts and a mistake that that astronaut had made at some time. I'm reading verbatim, and the words come out of my mouth, and you hear them at the same time I do. And it sounded awfully inappropriate, and that was not the intention. Nothing but respect, certainly, for these 7 heroes who died on board this flight. So that was embarrassing, and I apologize for that. Long and short of it is a national tragedy, an international tragedy this morning. Shuttle Columbia disintegrated as re-entering the atmosphere 39 miles above the state of Texas and New Mexico, debris across 3 states, a nation in mourning, at the White House, on Capitol Hill, at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, at Houston Control, at Johnson Space Center in Houston. The flags are at half-staff, and now we're waiting for a NASA news conference with the first official on-camera word of what happened today. Carrying us through the next hour, 2 of my colleagues are here. Let's continue with a Fox News alert.
America stands in shock and grief this day. Catastrophe striking the Space Shuttle Columbia, its crew of 7 astronauts, all tragically lost. I'm Greg Jarrett, together with Daria Alexander, to take you through the next couple of hours. Just 16 minutes before landing, there you see a Columbia streaking across the blue Texas sky. Something went terribly wrong. It broke apart in flames. It appeared to disintegrate. Much of it caught on several different versions of videotape as you see it. It would have been impossible for the 6 Americans and 1 Israeli to have survived the Mach 7 speed, some 12,000 miles per hour at an altitude of roughly 200,000 feet. It's gone, said one senior U.S. official. There is no particular official word from NASA. That may happen any moment now at a news briefing, but symbolic confirmation of our worst fears came more than 2 hours ago when the American flag next to the countdown clock at the Kennedy Space Center was lowered this morning to half-staff. So too at the nation's capital and at the White House. Debris, as you have seen, and we've been showing you videotape of that from several chopper views, found on the ground, confirmed to be that of Columbia, bits of metal and machinery. We are sad to report some human remains. Apparently, that has not been confirmed. The dramatic footage, though, as you're seeing it here once again, showing this sort of bright light in the sky, followed by plumes of smoke streaking diagonally through the air. Debris appeared to break off into separate balls of light as it continued downward, astonishing the people on the ground. President of the United States notified immediately where he was spending the weekend at Camp David. He cut that short, headed back to the White House. We are waiting word officially from the president. The administration, though, says there is no indication of evidence of terrorism. One official made two very important points. We want to repeat them once again in case you're just joining us now, 1 o'clock Eastern time, 10 a.m. out west. There was no threat to this particular mission in terms of terrorism, and importantly, the shuttle was out of range of a surface-to-air missile. Remember, it was very high in the sky. It was the 113th flight in the shuttle program's 22 years, 28th for Columbia, the oldest orbiter in the program. If we can, let's put up a picture of the crew of 7, 6 Americans and 1 Israeli. They are Commander Rick Husband, 45 years old, Air Force Colonel from Texas. Pilot William McCool, 41 years old, Navy Commander from Lubbock, Texas. Payload Commander Michael Anderson, 43 years old. Kaplana Chawla, who is 41 years old, immigrated to the U.S. from India. David Brown, 46-year-old, a Navy captain. Laurel Clark, who was 41 years old, a Navy diving medical officer aboard submarines before she became an astronaut back in 1996. And Ilan Ramon, 48 years old, a colonel in the Israeli Air Force, a hero to a great many Israelis. Columbia's crew had completed more than 80 scientific experiments during their time in orbit. Derry?
And of course, all eyes are on NASA as well as Washington. We're waiting for some sort of response from the president. In fact, let's go to Brett Baer, who is our Pentagon correspondent, to find out what is the latest and any reaction. Brett, are you there?
Hi, Derry. We are here waiting, obviously, for the NASA statement from Houston, but we will see something from the Pentagon that we have been noticing over the past few hours. There has, after the beginning of this, there was a video teleconference with Pentagon representatives as well as the commanders of Strategic Command and Northern Command, we're told. They were all working with FEMA and NASA at the beginning of this entire situation. We can tell you that Strategic Command, under that command, there is a specific support element at the 45th Space Wing, that is Patrick Air Force Base at Cape Canaveral. Essentially, it's called the Department of Defense Manned Space Flight Support. They provide astronaut rescue and recovery, airlift in the case of emergency. Pentagon officials tell us that Strategic Command, as well as Northern Command, which is in charge of Homeland Security, has been very active in this, working with FEMA and NASA. Also, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon and has been consulted and is continuing to monitor this situation as it develops.
Brett, I want to ask you a quick question. Perhaps you may not be the person to answer this, but we've been hearing reports that on January 16th, shortly after the Columbia lifted off, a piece of insulating foam on its external fuel tank came off and was believed to have struck the left wing of the shuttle. But then a leading flight director in Mission Control did assure reporters on Friday that the engineers had concluded that there wasn't any damage to the wing and was not considered to pose any safety hazard. So, of course, now everyone is wondering whether or not there could have been anything to that particular insulating foam damage.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation going on right now. As you mentioned, NASA came out and said that foam hitting the wing did not affect operations at the time. There is obviously a lot of things second-guessing going on right now. Hopefully we will hear more for this news conference, at this news conference from NASA about what they are looking at. We will likely, however, hear about operations recovering different parts of the debris and also what is ongoing as far as monitoring the situation. From the Pentagon point of view, I can tell you that a lot of things are in motion working with FEMA and NASA at this hour.
All right, Brett Baer, thanks so much for that.
If you are a reporter in Florida, you cover space shuttle launches routinely as well as some of their landings. And so joining us right now from Tampa, Florida, WTVT's Warren Uhle. Warren, what can you tell us?
Well, Greg, like everyone else, it's a checklist in your mind. After seeing so many of these launches and landings and watch so many of these missions, you start clicking off. I can't get away from that piece of insulation or whatever it was. NASA says it was insulation. I've looked at that tape this morning. It's hard to tell. The orbiter is inverted at the point in the launch procedure when you see this piece, something, coming off what appears to be the port side area. Whether it's off the main tank or perhaps a tile off the shuttle, I don't know. But that certainly is going to have to be job one for NASA, to either eliminate that or expound on its significance. A thing that sticks in my mind as well is these reports we've heard about tire pressure on the same side, on that port side of the orbiter, building so highly at just before this data was lost. Of course, these are all bits and pieces, but you'd think that if there was something wrong under that wing, that might be an indication. Another is this matter of the computers that Senator Nelson was speaking about with Shepard Smith in the last hour. Certainly, the critical nature of the angle of attack and the rest has to be a big focus. Another that sticks in my mind is the matter of the crew module. This is, if you will, the inside of a thermos, the vessel, a pressurized vessel. And we recall in the Challenger tragedy, this vessel was intact as it descended, and then, of course, came apart on the impact with the Atlantic. That territory there, such dense forest and swampy areas, as I understand, in Texas, it's going to be difficult to find these bits and pieces. And the other thing that rings strongly to one who's watched so many of these missions is really the safety record of NASA. One can't lose track of all these missions, 113, 2 of them now tragically, but out of 113, all the processes, the tens of thousands of bits and pieces and computer links, all the things that have to work to make this happen. Certainly we can't lose focus of how well this system has worked. And I must say, though there has been a good deal of complacency among the news media in recent years, I'd say, at the Space Center, NASA hasn't shown any signs, although there's been some controversy about the privatization of the program, these kinds of things, but there haven't been anything but positive indications. Whenever tiny cracks, for example, were found in fuel lines or issues were raised about bearings in these fuel lines, everything was stopped. They put the brakes on these launches, so there isn't much evidence, as there was before the Challenger disaster, about the ice, for example, on the Challenger launch pad. You don't see that kind of complacency, Greg, at least leading up to this. So just a few thoughts this morning as we try to figure this out.
And good ones. Warren Ellie, thank you very much. WTVT in Tampa, Florida.
You know, and just touching on that point that Warren was saying, it is important to remember that in the 42-year history of U.S. human spaceflight, there has never been an accident during descent to Earth or landing. Never been an accident in descent to Earth or landing. And in fact, of course, at this point, all we know is that the Space Shuttle Columbia has disintegrated into Earth. Don't know the causes, only speculation at this point, and that is why we are waiting on a press conference from NASA. They were expected to give us some information at 1 o'clock Eastern from the Kennedy Space Center. Again, hopefully they can fill in some of the blanks for us. But meantime, we want to talk to somebody who has certainly got a lot of background on touching down and landing. James Oberg, he's a Space Shuttle flight controller. And James, I just want you to walk me through this. What is it like? Imagine 9 a.m. Eastern today. The shuttle is to touch down at 9:16. Johnson Space Center in Houston loses contact with the shuttle. What is going on at this point?
Well, Derry, there are lots of things that flight controllers have in their hip pockets for what they call contingency situations. You start going, you assume something's gone wrong, and that the crew knows it and they're doing something else, and you try to coordinate almost by telepathy. This frequently does happen, and it usually has a happy ending because you get back in touch. In this case, though, there was such a time-critical nature here. The shuttle was supposed to show up on the runway, and when it didn't, it was clear that it wasn't just a radio communication problem. It was a problem with the actual vehicle, as we now see. But what you're doing when you first have this loss of communication is to, again, go through your checklist, because people practice. We drilled real hard in Mission Control when I was there, especially with these emergencies. 80% of the training we did was for things that never actually happened, but might have happened. In that case, we had to be ready.
And James, you know, just help me out. As far as I understand, there were no reports prior to losing contact of any problems aboard the shuttle, right?
That's not certain. Actually, Derry, there are a number of rumors passing around now, and our basic rule, as you should realize, especially in the news business, is that 80% of the earliest rumors are false. But we'll have to put it together. There was one thing that bothered some of us observers, some people who weren't involved directly, and that was during the launch of the shuttle, 16 days ago, there was a particularly large white object came off the external tank. It might have been insulation or ice, and hit under the left wing. And we couldn't see where the impact occurred because the camera angle wasn't right, but there was a splatter, and white dust came down from behind the wing down below. People who looked at that, and they were real experts, concluded it was a light piece of insulation that shattered and probably didn't do any damage. And part of the thing we learn in mission control is you depend on each other's expertise. So this was looked at, and there was no anxiety expressed about it, but maybe that was a misjudgment.
You know, James, one other question. I don't know if you can see our video of the shuttle coming down. I'm just wondering, for you, did you know exactly what was going on when we see that the shuttle coming down and then we see these little sparks of what is now said to be debris? I mean, was that it for you?
Derry, that's exactly right, because unfortunately, with the familiarity we have in the program with what it should look like, when it doesn't look like that, it's real distressing. Surprise is bad. Boredom is good. They don't mind being bored on a mission when nothing's going wrong. In this case, and because, you see, here in Texas, we're just uprange about 1,000 miles from the Kennedy Space Center where the landings occur. And we, on occasion, have the shuttles come overhead, usually at night because you can see the fireball. They leave a spectacular trail across the entire sky, a glowing golden fireball trailing an iridescent white, milky white trail that hangs in the sky for minutes afterward. That's what it should look like. Once this thing started coming apart, once there were multiple pieces, it was obvious something very bad had happened. It had turned sideways somehow into the slipstream, the Mach 12 slipstream, and been torn into fragments. So the fuels in the back end of the shuttle mixed and exploded. The hazardous chemicals probably all burned off 40 miles up. But now they're picking up the confetti-sized debris around East Texas, and now we know why.
Exactly. James Ober, Space Shuttle Flight Controller, thank you so much for that info.
Among the 7 astronauts lost on board the Space Shuttle Columbia, the first Israeli in space, a hero to all in Israel, Ilan Ramon, 48 years old, a colonel in Israel's Air Force. And as we point out, this was important, the first Israeli in space. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has issued a brief statement, quote, "The state of Israel and its citizens stand at this difficult hour alongside the families of the astronauts, the family of Ilan Ramon, and the American people and government." Joining us now from that government, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Daniel Ayalon. Mr. Ambassador, our condolences to the people of Israel as well as the family of Ilan Ramon. What have you been told? What has your government been told about this?
A few hours ago by Sean O'Keefe, the administrator of NASA, who told me about the mishap, about this great tragedy. They are still looking at the details and at the situation, but they were briefing us right from the start. I called and briefed my Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, and Foreign Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And this is a great, great tragedy for Israel, for the United States, but mainly for the families. And I am on my way this afternoon. I'm going to Houston to be with the family of Ilan Ramon. You know his very special story, being a son of a Holocaust survivor. So for us, for Israel, it was a very special occasion, and we are so filled with pride and hope. And now this great tragedy is just beyond comprehension.
Ilan Ramon, his father fought for Israel's statehood alongside his grandfather. Ramon himself fought in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, the Lebanon War in 1982. He was a very, very distinguished fighter pilot in the 1970s, the 80s, early 90s. Talk to us about how much he meant to the people of Israel.
Yes, indeed. Well, not only he was the first Israeli astronaut on board, which is a history in itself, but his human story, I think, embodies the story of the people of Israel and of the Jewish people. He was a very brave pilot with distinguished career. He was really bent on excellence and of achievements, and it really embodied the spirit of Israel. And of course, being a second generation of Holocaust survivors, I think this is really showing the victory of the human spirit. You know, he carried with him to space a drawing of a young Jewish boy who perished in the Holocaust, and the drawing was of the Earth as he imagined it would look from space. He took it with him to space, and this is in just 2 generations where the Jewish people were on the verge of demise, on the lowest ebb. Here we were soaring into excellence, into the cutting edge of technology. So of course it was very, very symbolic for us, on top of the fact that here we are cooperating with our best friend and ally, the United States, taking the cooperation between these 2 countries into further dimensions out of space.
I can assure you this country feels terrible not only for its own, but for the loss to the Israeli people as well.
Thank you. We really appreciate it, and condolences to our American brothers and friends. And we are together in that, and this is a tragic day. We will overcome it because we are still filled with pride. The legacy of these astronauts will fill us in pride, both in the United States and in Israel.
When you spoke to the Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, via the telephone, what was his reaction? How did he take this?
Of great sadness. First of all, he wanted to know all the details as they were unfolding. And then, of course, with great sadness, he issued the statement, as you saw, also extending condolences to our American friends. And he never forgot that on board were also 6 American astronauts. And again, in this tragedy, our fate, our grief is intertwined.
Once again, our heartfelt condolences to the Israeli people. The Israeli ambassador to the United States, Daniel Ayalon, thank you for joining us in this very difficult moment. We appreciate it.
We know our president was spending the weekend at Camp David when his White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, let him know of the Columbia disaster. The president then was rushed by motorcade to the White House, where we are expecting at some point for him to make some sort of statement about this disaster. Let's go to James Rosen, who is in Washington for us with the latest. James.
Dari, good afternoon from the White House, where President Bush has returned, as you say, from Camp David, where he was planning to spend the weekend. The president, with his Chief of Staff, Andrew Card, and others having arrived here back at the White House within the last hour. The president spoke with the NASA administrator, Sean O'Keefe, shortly after this incident occurred at around 10:38 a.m. That's when the president spoke with O'Keefe. Very shortly thereafter, the determination seems to have been made. A senior administration official at the White House and also an official at the CIA telling Fox News that there is no belief that this is connected to terrorist activity. The Homeland Security Secretary, Tom Ridge, made his way to the White House shortly after the incident occurred. He has been talking by telephone with officials in at least 5 states, including Texas, Louisiana, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, talking with those state officials in those states about the handling of the debris that has rained down on those states, apparently from Space Shuttle Columbia. The National Security Advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, also raced in to work at the White House to monitor the situation. The flag at the White House over the president's residence was lowered to half-staff in the last hour or so, and just a few minutes ago, the American flag that flies over the Eisenhower Executive Office building just across the way from the White House was also lowered to half-staff. As we have been hearing from our Pentagon correspondent, Brett Baer, the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, is at the Pentagon. What President Bush has been doing since he arrived back here at the White House in just the last 40 minutes or so, has been conferring with officials. We expect that he will, if he has not already, placed a condolence call to the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, of course, to note the sadness of the American people, not only over the loss of the Americans on board, but over the loss of Colonel Ramon. And as well, we expect that the President will make some kind of statement to the American people, not only because it would be customary at such a time for the Commander-in-Chief to address the American people, but also because we actually spotted White House employees moving the presidential podium from the Eisenhower Executive Office building across the way to the West Wing portion of the White House. So that's where it stands from the White House. Greg and Dari, back to you.
Curious, Dick Cheney, our vice president, has a home in Dallas, is a resident of Dallas, and we understand was in Texas hunting for the weekend. I'm just wondering if there have been any reports of him hearing anything.
Well, we are told that Vice President Cheney was nowhere near where the accident occurred, if indeed it is found to be an accident. But that he is unscathed and unharmed as a result of this. But Vice President Cheney, as you know, takes part in all national security deliberations when they are held with the national security.
We're going to go live to the news conference at NASA. Let's listen in.
About STS-107. We will have no questions today, just a few brief remarks.
As indicated earlier, we'll make a statement today and then at this point and a little later this afternoon at about 3 o'clock Eastern Time, there'll be a full technical briefing conducted from the Johnson Space Center. So at this point, we're just going to give you the circumstances as we understand them leading up to this particular tragedy today. This is indeed a tragic day for the NASA family, for the families of the astronauts who flew on STS-107, and likewise tragic for the nation. Immediately upon indication of a loss of communications on STS-107 at a little after 9 a.m. this morning, we began our contingency plan to preserve all the information relative to the flight activities. I immediately advised the President and the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Tom Ridge, at the point after landing was due to have occurred at 9:16. Spoke to them very briefly thereafter to advise that we had lost contact with the shuttle orbiter Columbia and STS-107 crew. They offered, the President specifically offered, full and immediate support to determine what the appropriate steps were thereafter to be taken. We then spent the next hour and a half working through the detail and information of what we have received, and Bill Reedy will walk you through the specifics of those operational and technical issues here in just a moment. Thereafter, we have met with the family members of the astronauts who were here at Kennedy Space Center and are soon to be departing back to Johnston, to Houston. The President has called and spoken to them to express our deepest national regrets. We have assured them that we will begin the process immediately to recover their loved ones and understand the cause of this tragedy. At this time, we have no indication that the mishap was caused by anything or anyone on the ground. We've assembled a mishap investigation team that immediately was assembled upon the point of past the stage in which the orbiter was to have landed here at Kennedy Space Center a little after 9:30, and that team in turn is coordinating on a regular basis on all the facts that are pertaining to this from the Johnson Space Center, and a rapid response team from here at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as participants from the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. In addition to these internal efforts, we have also appointed a mishap investigation board, an external group of people who are independent from NASA, who will immediately be charged with the opportunity to look at all the information that was immediately locked down right after our absence of communications. Each of these individuals are safety and mission assurance related officials in other federal departments of the federal government from the Air Force, from the Navy, from the Department of Transportation, and across the federal expanse. The investigation team will also be chaired by an individual contacted to serve who is external to the federal agencies, and we'll have the opportunity to coordinate all the information again from an external view. So we'll be conducting both the internal activity as well as an external review immediately to ascertain the causes and circumstances under which this tragedy occurred. We pulled together all the federal agencies and local governments as well. In discussion several times this morning with Secretary Tom Ridge, the effort is heavily underway to coordinate an understanding of exactly where the orbiter path had taken it from West Texas towards the Kennedy Space Center here in Florida, and to make sure that the material on the ground is secured so that the investigation can begin promptly. We would urge anyone who believes they have discovered or found any material to stay away from it and to please contact local officials. The local first responder groups for emergency services and so forth have been authorized and directed by Secretary Tom Ridge to assist in all manner. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is coordinating that effort on the part of the Department of Homeland Security. I was here this morning with the families of the astronauts and their friends. It started out as a pretty happy morning, awaiting the landing of STS-107. And we had highly anticipated their return because we couldn't wait to congratulate them for their extraordinary performance and their excellent efforts on the science mission on this very important flight. They dedicated their lives to pushing the scientific challenges for all of us here on Earth. And they dedicated themselves to that objective and did it with a happy heart, willingly, and with great enthusiasm. The loss of this valiant crew is something we will never be able to get over, and certainly the families of all of them, we have assured we will do everything we can possibly do to guarantee that they work their way through this horrific tragedy. We ask the members of the media to honor that too. To please respect their privacy and please understand the tragedy that they are going through at this time. We will help the media assure that be the case as well. We trust that the prayers of the nation will be with them and with their families. And again, a more courageous group of people you could not have hoped to know than the families of these crew members. And an extraordinary, extraordinary group of astronauts who gave their lives and did it in a way that they knew exactly the risk, but never, and ever, do we ever want to see a circumstance where something like this could ever happen. And we diligently dedicate ourselves every single day to assuring these things don't occur. And when they do, we have to act responsibly, accountably, and that's exactly what we will do. To give you more of the operational detail of what has occurred here since 9 a.m. this morning, the Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, a former astronaut, retired captain of the United States Navy, former test flight pilot, Bill Reedy, who has commanded 2 separate missions previously and as an astronaut, and is now, again, our Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, and has worked with me all morning along with all of us here at Kennedy Space Center to work through the details of the events as we know them and to present to you the facts that we understand them. Again, the technical details that are being worked very diligently now will be covered again at 3 p.m. this afternoon out of the Johnson Space Center. With that, let me turn it over to Captain Bill Reedy.
It's a truly difficult day for all of us. many of us were standing alongside the runway waiting to celebrate their triumphant return after a 16-day science mission. I think you could tell from the downlink that they loved what they were doing and they thought what they were doing was extremely important, pushing back those boundaries in science. At 9 o'clock, we heard that they had lost data from the spacecraft, and it appears that that was at about 200,000 feet, about Mach 18. The loss of data was somewhere over north central Texas, and at the planned landing time of 9:16, we initiated our contingency action plan called the Rescue Coordination Center and initiated a search and rescue effort. Sadly, I think from the video that's available, it does not appear that there were any survivors. We have currently impounded all the data, including all the pre-flight certification of flight readiness for STS-107. And at this point, I'd have to say it's too early to speculate about the exact cause. Obviously, we're looking at all the data that we have available. Those people that have videos, those people that have still pictures, we'll urge you to contact NASA so that we can coordinate those things that might be available. And to reiterate what the administrator said, those people that may find debris, do not touch it, do not move it. Contact your local authorities, have them impound it and secure the area so that our technical specialists will be able to piece together the puzzle so that we can resolve what happened. Our immediate focus is on the crew families, and we spent some time with them. The President called. I'd have to say the families are bearing up with an incredible amount of dignity considering their loss.